In New York City, this is Maria Bartiromo's Wall Street.
And happy weekend to all. Welcome to the program that analyzes the week that was and helps position you for the week ahead. I'm Maria Bartiromo. Thanks for being here. The most highly anticipated event of the political year so far has turned into a nightmare for Democrats.
The conversations range from whether he should be in this race tomorrow morning to what was wrong with him.
My phone really never stopped buzzing throughout. And the universal reaction was somewhere approaching panic.
It started minutes in. It started with the first couple of answers, and it has continued throughout the night from a, oh, my God, oh, my God, oh, my God, to what do we do about this?
There are going to be discussions about whether he should continue.
You are starting to see here, at least privately, discussions among Democrats about whether or not Biden can effectively go on with this campaign.
It's not just panic, it's pain of what we saw tonight.
Yes, and even the liberal New York Times and Washington Post headlines read the same. The great Dem freakout is upon us. Biden must bow out of the race. Biden cannot go on like this. But at least two Democrats, thought to be the possible replacements for Biden, are standing by their man.
I will never turn my back on President Biden. Never turn my back on President Biden. I don't know a Democrat in my party that would do so.
It was a slow start. There's no question about that. But I thought it was a strong finish. And what we saw tonight is more of the same. Joe Biden fighting for the American people. Donald Trump fighting for himself.
Joining me now is the Council of Economic Advisors Chairman under President Trump, Kevin Hassett, and former economic advisor to President Obama, Robert Wolf. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here this weekend. We so appreciate your time. And guys, I want to talk to you about the economic points that the candidates made at the debate on Thursday night, and we will get to that. But first, Robert, you're very involved in the Democrat Party. You're a leader there, and you helped Barack Obama prepare for his debates. I've got to start off there and get your reaction to Joe Biden's performance and the future for Joe Biden as the Democrat nominee.
Maria, thank you for asking me that question. And Kevin, nice to see you. Listen, I've known President Biden for 2 decades. I love the guy. When my dad passed away, you know, the empathy he shared with me about his family troubles, you know, was something I'll never forget. But I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I am not happy with the president's performance. Yes, Maria, I could pivot to all of President Trump's lies and so on and so forth and do these what's about isms. But the truth is that was for President Biden to fact check on the spot, and he didn't do it. He had a lot of softballs in front of him. He could have hit out of the park, and he didn't go there. On image, presentation, style, it was a bad night. I don't want to lean in this early and be a typical Democratic bedwetter and say, oh, my God, we have to change tomorrow. But, you know, there should certainly be conversations whether he can, you know, continue going forward and be the guy we want him to be. And so I think that it was a bad night. But like I said, it was only 90 minutes.
Kevin Hassett, same question for you. In terms of the future, we should point out that high inflation was one of the key issues during the debate Thursday night. And we know that inflation was at 1.4% when Joe Biden entered the Oval Office, having gone all the way up to 9.1% and have come down from the highs at this point. Your reaction?
Basically, President Biden inherited 6.5% growth and 1.9% inflation, 1.5%, say, over the previous year. And he keeps saying otherwise. And, you know, when I was CEA chair, when the president said a false fact, that I would correct it. And you'll remember, Maria, I would go on my Twitter feed and say, wait a minute, here's the right number. And it's really kind of stunning that they keep going out with false numbers, inaccurate numbers, in order to try to place the blame for inflation on President Trump, and that nobody's speaking up to correct it.
Robert, look, whether it's Biden or another Democrat as the presidential candidate, we're likely to have the same progressive economic policies. Isn't that right? I mean, you're going to, you know, put the blame on corporate greed, put the blame on Donald Trump. It's going to be the same policies, whoever it is. Isn't that right?
I actually don't think President Biden's legislation's been progressive. If you look at the 2 biggest things he did, which is the CHIPS Act and the Infrastructure Act, if we look at those were bipartisan, and those are critically important. If you look at what's going to happen in Wisconsin with Microsoft, or if you look at what's going to happen in Arizona with Intel, those are key. And Kevin knows, he was advising the president, Trump, during those times. We heard every week it was infrastructure week. We should applaud that infrastructure finally got passed. We've been speaking about that for decades.
Well, Robert, do you think that the spending had anything to do with the inflation? Because you mentioned some of the victories that President Biden has had, but what? It was the CHIPS Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, the Fiscal Responsibility Act, forgiving student loan debt, green energy tax credit. You know, the critics say that it was $7 trillion in spending and borrowing on Joe Biden's watch. Did that not contribute to inflation?
It absolutely contributed. I'm not saying that the spending both by President Trump and President Biden, I think I said that, you know, was a big overreach, but it was also at a time that we've never seen before. And yes, I think, yes, the answer is, by the way, I've been on your show and other shows. I was not supportive of as much as they did. I was actually would have probably been about 30% lower. I was probably closer to where Joe Manchin was on that, on those amounts. But I think at that point, I'd rather have done something than nothing.
Biden continues to say he will not tax anyone making less than $400,000 a year, but he does want the tax cuts to expire. So, Kevin, take that on. I mean, look, you are talking about higher taxes for many, including those who make under $400,000, if you allow the tax cuts to expire. Isn't that right?
Right. Well, he's going to have to choose. He'll choose one or the other. And the fact is that the history of it is, if you go back and look, President Obama ran against the Bush tax cuts, but then when he owned the economy and what happened to the economy, then he extended them twice, because everybody knows that lower taxes are good for the economy, and you don't want to be sitting in the White House when the economy falls apart. So President Biden, my guess is going to extend most of the Trump tax cuts, but the things that he might leave out are really the most important. So right now, the things that are expiring that are important, most important, are expensing of capital equipment purchases by firms. That's where you get the new machines that make workers more productive and drives their wages up. Capital spending last year went negative for the first time in a long time because of this expiring expensing. And then the other thing is that there's a special deduction for small business so that they don't have a tax disadvantage vis-a-vis corporations that have a 21% rate. And that special deduction is also expiring. And so there's going to be a big tax increase on small businesses that create jobs, and a big tax increase on firms that are buying machines if President Biden has his way. And there's no way that that's good for inflation or the economy.
Well, Robert, I know President Biden brought up Medicare quite a few times last night, but President Trump said that Biden is killing Social Security and Medicare with his open border policy. Watch this.
All of these people are coming in. They're putting them on Medicare. They're putting them on Social Security. They're going to destroy Social Security. This man is going to single-handedly destroy Social Security. He will wipe out Social Security. He will wipe out Medicare.
We've also, right before the debate, came a story about 16 Nobel Prize-winning economists. By the way, I should point out one of those economists is actually the husband to Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. But nonetheless, Yellen's husband is among those predicting that a Trump inflation bomb will happen with the plan of deporting immigrants. Robert, take it on. Your thoughts.
Listen, we need complete border security. I think it was incredibly disappointing that we didn't pass the bipartisan border and immigration package that Senator Langford, an incredible conservative from Oklahoma, put forth. Listen, it's ridiculous that people like Lindsey Graham would not support that. He was part of the Gang of Eight. Marco Rubio was part of the Gang of Eight. We need comprehensive immigration reform, and that would have brought more border security, more asylum enforcement. And with respect to the noble economists, you know, I'm not a noble economist. Here's what I would say. I absolutely think President Trump's idea of 100% tariffs is absolutely absurd. I think protectionism is never a good thing. I think we should let the market dictate pricing. So from that perspective, you know, I would say that what he's talked about, and if Kevin's involved in that administration, I don't think we'll ever see that. But some of the things he talked about is incredibly inflationary.
Kevin Hassett and Robert Wolf, we so appreciate your time this weekend. Thanks very much for being here. stocks wrapping up the month, the quarter, and the first half of the year as inflation shows signs of slowing. The founder of Strategis, Jason Trennert, is here on where to put your money in the second half of the year. That's coming up. Stay with us. Welcome back. Take a look at markets and how they ended the month as stocks ended the final trading week of both the second quarter and the first half of the year. Amazing. We are through the first half of 2024. The S&P 500 seeing its best performance in the first half of an election year since 1976. We also got May PCE inflation data showing inflation at the lowest level in more than 3 years. Annual prices up 2.6% as expected and unchanged from the previous month. Joining me now is the chairman and CEO of Strategis, Jason Trennert, is with us. Jason, it's great to see you. Thank you so much for being here.
Great to be here.
I want to get your take on what you're expecting for the second half of the year. And I love your common man inflation index, which I'm going to ask you about as well. But first, give us your outlook for the second half. Will it be as strong as the first?
It's probably unlikely to be quite as strong as it was in the first half, just because we're up about 15% in the first 6 months of the year, and earnings are probably not going to be up anywhere near that for this year. They'll probably be up more like 10. So I would try to manage your expectations. I wouldn't say that I'm bearish, but I think the first half is going to be a tough act to follow. Having said that, I do think you're going to continue to get fiscal stimulus. In my opinion, it's way out of bounds. We're doing deficit spending like there's no tomorrow, but that's likely to continue. And there is a decent chance, because the inflation numbers have moderated a bit, that the Fed will ease in the second half of the year. So that makes it pretty hard to be underweight risk or not involved in the stock market. But again, I would be careful about extrapolating out the first half into the second half.
Well, Jason, it's a really important point to make that the second half includes the election. And isn't it true that we're seeing all sorts of ways from the Biden administration to goose things up? You've written about this many times, whether it's the Strategic Petroleum Reserve or interest rates, the way Janet Yellen is doing the auctions. What are they doing to make the economy look as great as possible going into November 5th, the presidential election?
Maria, they're doing everything. I would say every incumbent tries to goose the economy in the ways that they can. But I would say the Biden administration is taking this to an art form I've never quite seen before. And it, in my opinion, poses great risk to the future health of the American economy. But in terms of just spending, you've had about $170 billion of student loan forgiveness. You have a renewal of the employee retention tax credit. Those are things that are, even though the pandemic was 4 years ago, so those are things that put money directly into people's pockets. In addition to that, as you mentioned, the Treasury Secretary is messing around with the refunding schedule to issue a lot of short-term debt as opposed to long-term debt.
Yeah. That
keeps longer-term interest rates lower than they ordinarily would be. But again, you're using every tool in the book, and this is, in my opinion, for crass political reasons, as opposed to a sober and a well thought out economic plan for the future of this country.
And Scott Bessent has said the same thing when he has joined me in the past. Jason, I want to get your take in terms of the inflation story, because, of course, this past week we got the PCE index, which is the Federal Reserve's favored inflation data. However, it shows inflation coming down. You have created a different index, which is basically zeroing in on the things that most people need to live. Tell us about the Common Man Index, Jason.
Right. We call it the Common Man CPI, and these are just things that people have to buy every day, every week, every month. So it's food, it's energy, it's shelter, children's clothing, insurance, and utilities. So you exclude, flat panel television screens and trips to Barbados. These are just what the common man has to pay for, come hell or high water. And if you look at that, the common man, their standard of living has deteriorated by about 7% over the last 3 years. And I think it drives me crazy when you see some of these PhD economists who you mentioned before, when they say, listen, inflation's come down, what's the problem? They're ignoring the cumulative effects of inflation, which means that inflation has greatly outpaced wages over the past 3 years. So workers are still very much behind, even if inflation is coming down. Inflation will reaccelerate. in 2025 and 2026. It is very likely. We've done an historical analysis of inflation waves, and generally speaking, once you have one wave of inflation over 6%, the chances of getting another wave are about 9 and 10. And that will very much be the case if, in my opinion, if President Biden is reelected.
Great to see you this weekend, and we so appreciate your time. Thank you, Jason Trennert.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
We'll see you soon. Severing support for Joe Biden, why a former Democrat staffer says the president has lost his vote. Will this turn the tide for Donald Trump with the youth vote? We are hearing his story when we come back. Stay with us. Welcome back. Debate debacle. Democrat voters digesting President Biden's abysmal performance against former President Trump on Thursday night. A recent poll taken before the face-off shows Biden ahead with young voters by more than 20 points. But what do they think of him now? Joining me now is former Democrat staffer Jeremy Edelson. Jeremy, it's great to have you this weekend. You have been very involved in the Democrat Party at college and beyond, but you say you will not vote for Biden. Why is that, and what are other young Democrats telling you?
That's right, Maria. Thank you for having me. I campaigned for President Obama. I campaigned for Hillary Clinton. I voted for Joe Biden. And I, like many Democrats, was incredibly optimistic at the beginning of this term. And what we saw Thursday night with the debate was a disastrous performance that was emblematic of a disastrous term. And I think people are about to start talking about it even more than we've seen already. And I think an avalanche is coming from the Democratic Party looking for a different candidate.
So who do you want to see there? And how easy would it be to swap out Joe for someone else?
I think at this point it'd be very difficult for the Democrats to replace Joe Biden with somebody else. Kamala Harris is having the same struggles as Joe Biden is at this time. And I think the Democrats are really reaping what they've sowed with suppressing dissent within their party. And Robert Kennedy Jr. is polling much stronger against Donald Trump than Joe Biden is. And the Democrats missed their opportunity to have him as their candidate. And I think in the eyes of a lot of young voters and many voters more generally, this is now officially a race between Donald Trump and Robert Kennedy.
Well, how many people are you talking with who may have been against Donald Trump, but now say, I've got to vote Trump?
I think that a lot of the fear-mongering that's been going on in the Democratic Party about a possible Donald Trump presidency, a second term, just collapsed in front of a lot of people's eyes.
You mean because of Joe Biden's performance in the debate?
Because of Joe Biden's performance as well as Donald Trump's. I think, President Trump may have stepped into the bounds of hyperbole, as he may do sometimes. He may have been a bit discursive. But overall, Donald Trump was very measured compared to how the media tends to portray him. And he was surprisingly using a lot of unifying rhetoric. And I think that is what a lot of voters are looking for, especially young voters who really want the candidates to transcend partisanship and offer a message that will really usher in a century of positivity for Americans.
Well, I mean, look, Joe Biden lured in young people by promising them that he'll forgive their student loan debt, despite the fact that the Supreme Court said it was unconstitutional. Is that one of the encouragements for young people? Is that still there?
Intriguingly, if you look at the polling on the student loan forgiveness that President Biden has been pursuing, it has not resonated with voters in general or student debt holders. And I think the reason for that is that it doesn't address the systemic issues that have led to a generation being saddled in student debt. And at the same time, it's, I think a lot of people understand that it's not necessarily ethical to distribute student loan debt to a population in which many people have chosen to forego going to college to save money or could never afford college to begin with. And so I think a lot of young voters aren't happy with the student loan forgiveness that President Biden is pursuing, which is really seen as pandering.
Yep. All right. We will leave it there. Jeremy, it's great to get your take on all of this. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Maria. Appreciate it. All
right, Jeremy Edelson. Oh, I've got one important thing you need to know about ahead of next week, and that's next. Welcome back. One thing you need to know about ahead of next week, more Americans are hitting the road for the 4th of July holiday travel. From planes and trains to cars, AAA is predicting a record-breaking travel week. Nearly 71 million people are expected to venture 50 miles or more from home. That's a 5% increase from the year before. More than 60 million Americans plan to drive, nearly 6 million others will fly, and more than 4 million will travel by bus, cruise, or train. Expect to see some big crowds in Seattle, Washington, Orlando, Florida, and Anchorage, Alaska, ranking as the top 3 travel destinations. We'll be following this on Mornings with Maria all week, 6 to 9 a.m. Eastern, weekdays here on Fox Business. And I'll see you on Sunday morning over on the Fox News Channel at 10 a.m. Eastern live for Sunday Morning Futures. I've got exclusive interviews this weekend with Senate GOP Conference Chair Senator John Barrasso, RNC Co-Chair Lara Trump, and former House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes, live Sunday morning on Fox News. Hope you'll join me. That'll do it for us, meanwhile, here on Fox Business. Thank you so much for being with us. Have a great rest of the weekend and a safe 4th of July. I'll see you again next time.